You never imagined that day would be the last time you would try to explain yourself, the last time you would ask for understanding, the last time you would believe that being vulnerable was a sign of strength. But that's exactly what happened, and you didn't even realize it in the moment. Something inside you shifted, quietly, without warning. And when you finally went silent, when the mouth that begged for crumbs of attention closed forever, something began to grow in the shadows of your chest. Something no one around you could perceive until it was too late. Something silent, yet deadly. Something they themselves were creating without knowing. Every rejection, every dismissal, every moment they ignored you was feeding it. In that suffocating silence, where despair once lived, the embryo of a monster was born. One they themselves molded, wound by wound, abandonment by abandonment, rejection by rejection. They created the inner monster you never wanted to face, but could no longer ignore. It was growing stronger each day you stayed quiet. Loneliness was always there, even when you were surrounded by people. You spoke, gestured, pretended to smile, but inside it was like screaming inside a soundproof glass box. No one heard, no one saw, and the worst part, you knew it. You could feel their indifference cutting through you like a blade. Your brain registered every rejection as if it were a physical cut. Neuroscience explains that emotional pain activates the same brain regions as physical pain. You felt that invisible knife tearing inside while the whole world moved forward. It was like being trapped in a dark tunnel while everyone walked under the sun. It was overcoming pain in the most brutal way possible. Alone, invisible, forgotten. Every time you swallowed your pride, every time you accepted crumbs disguised as affection, you felt a pang of shame rising in your throat. The guilt of having allowed it. The guilt of having believed. The guilt of being too weak to set boundaries when you should have. You became your own executioner, sentencing yourself to a prison of regret and self-blame. You became your own judge, your own executioner, condemning yourself for crimes that were actually committed against you. And in that internal tribunal, where you were both defendant and judge, the painful process of understanding it all began. Pain breeds strength, not as a motivational cliché, but as natural law, as pure survival biology, as the only way forward when there's nowhere else to go. But something strange began to happen when you finally stopped trying, when you stopped seeking approval, when you withdrew emotionally, even though you were still physically present. Something changed inside you. An invisible transformation, yet irreversible. A metamorphosis happening in the darkness, away from everyone's eyes. It was as if the emptiness inside you began to solidify, to take shape, to transform into something dense and heavy. It was no longer just sadness. It was a dark force, something pulsing slowly deep in your chest, organized, cold, calculated, something waiting for the right moment to emerge and show them what they created. You began to understand the concept of shadow, not as absolute evil, but as everything you had repressed for so long. Everything that was suffocated, all the anger you never allowed to escape because good people don't feel that way. The dark transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. You were becoming something new, something powerful, something they would fear. They didn't notice. Of course not. To them, your silence was surrender. Your absence was defeat. Your calmness was weakness. Lost, they said. Gave up, they laughed. Couldn't handle it, they concluded. Never imagining they were being ignored and feared at the same time. They had no idea what was coming. The world always interprets silence as capitulation, never as planning, never as internal reorganization, never as the moment before the storm. And while they judged your retreat as cowardice, you were building something they never imagined possible. You were gestating the monster that suffering makes strong. You were preparing for the moment they would finally see what they created. In the darkness of your mind, while the world outside remained indifferent, you began to revisit every memory, every humiliation, every time you were diminished, every broken promise. Everything came back with surgical clarity, like scenes from a movie playing in slow motion. You analyzed it all with cold precision. You were being reborn from pain, but you still didn't fully understand what that meant or where it would lead. The neuroplasticity of your brain kicked in, rewiring itself after the trauma, creating new neural pathways, new interpretations, new patterns of response. You were literally becoming a different person at the cellular level. The pain wasn't just teaching you, it was reconstructing you. And what emerged from that reconstruction was something from failure to feared. You realized, with a clarity that hurt more than the rejection itself, that you had spent years trying to be good, as if that were enough to be loved. But kindness without limits isn't virtue. It's useless sacrifice. It's offering yourself on the altar of others, hoping that one day they'll notice your worth. But they never do, until it's too late to fix what they broke, until the monster is already awake, until you've learned that dark motivation is the only fuel that burns eternal. You thought the loneliness was the worst part. You thought that feeling invisible while surrounded by people was as low as it could go. But you were wrong. The worst part wasn't being alone. It was realizing you had always been alone, even when they pretended to care. That realization cut deeper than any knife ever could. The neuroscience of isolation is brutal and unforgiving. When your brain perceives social rejection, it doesn't just hurt emotionally. It activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that processes physical pain. You weren't imagining it. The pain breeds strength wasn't metaphorical. It was literal, measurable, real. Your body was screaming while your mouth stayed silent. You walked through crowds feeling like a ghost. People looked through you, not at you. Conversations happened around you, never with you. You became a spectator in your own life, watching everyone else connect while you remained trapped behind invisible walls. The outcast's journey had begun, whether you wanted it or not. Every attempt to reach out felt like throwing stones into a bottomless pit. No echo, no response, just endless silence that confirmed your worst fears, that maybe you didn't matter, that maybe you were the problem, that maybe everyone else was right to keep their distance. The inner monster fed on these thoughts, growing stronger with each one. But here's what they didn't tell you about loneliness. It's a teacher, a cruel, merciless teacher that strips away every illusion you ever had about human connection. It forces you to see people as they really are, not as you wish them to be. And in that brutal clarity, something begins to shift inside you. Something dark, something powerful come back in nature. The guilt came in waves, crashing over you at 3 a.m. The voice in your head asking why you weren't enough, why you had to try so hard when everyone else seemed to connect effortlessly, why your presence felt like a burden instead of a gift. You carried that shame like a second skin, invisible to everyone but suffocating to you. You blamed yourself for everything, for being too much or not enough, for caring too deeply or not showing it right, for every friendship that faded, every connection that died, every moment you stood alone in a room full of people. The suffering makes strong process was happening, but you couldn't see it yet. You only felt the weight. Society teaches us that vulnerability is strength, that opening up creates connection, but they lied. They didn't tell you that vulnerability without reciprocation is just self-destruction, that giving your heart to people who won't protect it is suicide in slow motion. You learned this lesson the hard way, one scar at a time. The hardest part was watching them move on so easily. While you were drowning in the absence, they were thriving in it. Your presence or absence made no difference to their lives. You were replaceable, forgettable, dispensable. And that truth, that cold, hard truth, was the catalyst for your dark transformation. You started to understand that the problem wasn't that you were unlovable. The problem was that you kept offering your love to people who couldn't recognize its value. You were casting pearls before swine, bleeding yourself dry for those who saw your blood and asked for more. The hidden power of pain was showing you who deserved you and who didn't. Slowly, something began to harden inside you. Not hatred, something colder. Not anger, something more calculated. It was the birth of boundaries you should have built years ago. The rise from the ashes wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, deliberate, and absolutely irreversible. You stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending your worth, stopped begging for crumbs of attention from people who wouldn't give you a full meal. The silence that once felt like defeat now felt like power. You were no longer ignored and feared. You were choosing to be absent. That's a completely different energy. The brain's remarkable ability to adapt, neuroplasticity, was rebuilding you from the inside out. Every painful memory was being reprocessed, reinterpreted, rewired. You weren't healing, you were evolving, becoming something that couldn't be hurt the same way again. The monster wasn't destruction, it was adaptation, survival, evolution. You realized that loneliness wasn't your weakness, it was your laboratory, the place where you discovered who you really were without the distortion of others' opinions, where you learned that dark motivation comes from accepting the darkness, not fighting it, where you understood that being alone wasn't the curse, being surrounded by the wrong people was, and now standing in the aftermath of that isolation, you see it clearly. They didn't reject you because you weren't enough. They rejected you because you were too much, too real, too deep, too intense for their shallow waters. The resilience story wasn't about becoming what they wanted. It was about becoming what you needed. And that monster they created, it was the version of you that would never beg for belonging again. The guilt sits in your chest like a stone, heavy, suffocating, constant. You blame yourself for letting it get this far, for allowing them to treat you like you were disposable, for accepting less than you deserved while pretending it was enough. The inner monster whispers that you're weak, that you should have known better, that this is all your fault. Every night, the same questions circle in your mind like vultures. Why did you stay? Why did you forgive so easily? Why did you believe their empty promises when your gut screamed the truth? The shame of your own choices burns hotter than their betrayal. You became complicit in your own destruction, and that knowledge is the cruelest burden of all. You tell yourself you were just trying to be understanding, patient, compassionate, but deep down, you know the truth. You were afraid of being alone, afraid of being unlovable, afraid that if you demanded more, you'd end up with nothing. So you settled, and every time you settled, a piece of you died. Pain breeds strength, but first it teaches you about weakness. The worst part is seeing it so clearly now. Every red flag you ignored, every boundary you let them cross, every time you swallowed your pain to keep the peace. It's like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the screen, except you're both the audience and the victim. The dark transformation begins with this brutal self-awareness. You remember specific moments with surgical precision. The time you apologized for their mistake, the night you cried alone while they slept peacefully, the day you convinced yourself that love was supposed to hurt this much. Each memory is a knife, and you're the one holding it against your own throat. Suffering makes strong, but the suffering you inflict on yourself cuts deepest. There's a special kind of torture in knowing you could have stopped it, that at any moment, you could have walked away, set boundaries, demanded respect. But you didn't. You stayed. You endured. You made excuses for them while condemning yourself. The outcast's journey started long before they pushed you out. It started when you abandoned yourself first. People talk about self-love like it's simple, like you just wake up one day and decide to value yourself. But they don't tell you about the shame that comes before that awakening. The shame of realizing you taught people how to hurt you. That your silence was permission. That every time you accepted less, you told them you were worth less. This guilt is the dark soil where reborn from pain takes root. You judge yourself harsher than anyone else ever could. The internal courtroom is always in session, and you're a merciless prosecutor. How could you be so stupid? Why weren't you stronger? What's wrong with you that you couldn't see it? The monster isn't just what they created. It's what you became to yourself through relentless self-punishment. But here's what nobody tells you about guilt. It's actually a sign of growth. You can only feel guilty about the past when you've evolved beyond it. The version of you that accepted mistreatment couldn't see what was wrong. The fact that you see it now, that it burns and aches and makes you want to scream, that's proof you're no longer that person. From failure to feared requires first admitting the failure. The guilt is trying to teach you something crucial. Not that you were wrong to be vulnerable, but that you were wrong about who deserved your vulnerability. Not that you loved too much, but that you gave that love to people who couldn't hold it with care. The lesson isn't to close your heart. It's to be smarter about who gets the key. Slowly, painfully, the guilt begins to transform into something else, something harder, something that looks less like shame and more like resolve. You start to understand that beating yourself up for past choices doesn't change them, but it can change how you choose moving forward. The dark motivation isn't about forgetting. It's about using that memory as fuel. You realize that the person you need to apologize to isn't them, it's yourself. For every time you dimmed your light to make them comfortable, for every moment you chose their approval over your own peace, for staying silent when you should have roared. The awakening. The monster happens when you finally direct your anger where it belongs, at the version of you that allowed it. This is the turning point. The moment when guilt stops being a prison and becomes a catalyst. When the shame of what you tolerated becomes the foundation for boundaries they'll never cross again. The hidden power of pain reveals itself, not in the hurt itself, but in who you decide to become because of it. Underestimated revenge starts here, in the quiet decision to never betray yourself again. The neuroscience backs this up. Your brain is literally rewiring itself through this process. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and self-control, is building new pathways. You're not just feeling different. You're becoming different at the cellular level. The resilience story isn't metaphorical. It's biological, measurable, real. And so the guilt, heavy as it is, becomes the weight that strengthens you. Like resistance training for the soul. Every moment you sit with that discomfort, every time you face what you allowed, you're building the monster that will never be taken advantage of again. The guilt doesn't disappear. It crystallizes into wisdom, into power, into the unshakable knowledge that you'll never be that person again. And they'll never have that kind of access to you again. Ever. Something is changing. You feel it in your bones, in the way you hold yourself, in the silence that used to terrify you but now feels like armor. The weakness is hardening into something else, something dangerous, something they won't recognize until it's too late. The dark transformation isn't loud or dramatic. It's happening in the quiet spaces where you used to beg for their attention. Your voice sounds different now, calmer, colder. There's no more pleading in it, no more desperation for understanding. When you speak, people lean in, not because you're louder, but because there's a weight to your words that wasn't there before. The monster doesn't announce itself, it just is, and people sense it before they see it. You notice it in small ways first, the way you no longer rush to respond to messages, the way you can sit in silence without filling it with nervous chatter, the way you look people in the eye with a steadiness that makes them uncomfortable. You're not trying to intimidate anyone. You've just stopped trying to make yourself smaller. Pain breeds strength in ways that can't be faked or performed. There's a new kind of energy building inside you. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly. Something colder, more patient, more calculated. It's the energy of someone who has been pushed to the edge and decided not to fall, but to build a fortress there instead. The inner monster isn't chaos, it's order forged in fire. People who used to dismiss you are starting to notice. They sense something has shifted, even if they can't name it. You're no longer the safe option, the one they can call when they're bored, the backup plan. You've become unpredictable, unavailable, unknowable, and that scares them more than any confrontation ever could, ignored and feared. But this time, on your terms. The psychology behind this is fascinating. When you stop seeking external validation, when you stop performing for approval, your nervous system actually recalibrates. Your cortisol levels drop. Your amygdala stops firing in panic mode. You're not suppressing emotion. You're transmuting it, turning suffering make strong from a platitude into a biochemical reality. You start setting boundaries without explanation. No becomes a complete sentence. You don't justify, defend, or apologize for taking up space. The people who respected you celebrate this growth. The people who used you call it cold, call it bitter, call it a phase. But deep down, they know the truth. They're seeing the powerful comeback of someone they should have valued from the beginning. Your posture changes. Your walk changes. There's a confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from no longer caring what they think. You've seen the worst that abandonment and rejection can do, and you survived it. What else is there to be afraid of? The rise from the ashes isn't metaphorical when you've actually burned and rebuilt yourself from scratch. This new strength feels dangerous because it is, not to others, but to the old patterns that kept you small, to the people-pleasing that nearly destroyed you, to the voice that said you weren't enough. That voice is dying, suffocated by the dark motivation that comes from finally choosing yourself. And it's terrifying how good that feels. You catch yourself in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. Same face, different eyes. There's something ancient and primal in that gaze. The look of a predator that was once prey. The look of someone who learned that survival requires fangs, not apologies. The awakening. The monster is complete when you stop apologizing for your existence. The dangerous part isn't that you want revenge. It's that you don't need it anymore. Your absence is the revenge. Your growth is the revenge. Your peace is the revenge. They wanted you broken, and instead, you became unbreakable. That's the kind of underestimated revenge that keeps them up at night, wondering what they lost when they let you go. You understand now what they never could. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about what you build in the crater left by the fall. That power isn't given. It's forged in the moments when you have nothing left but the choice to keep going or give up. You chose to keep going, and that choice created something from failure to feared. The neuroscience of resilience shows that your brain has literally changed. The prefrontal cortex has strengthened. The hippocampus has developed new pathways. You're not imagining this transformation. It's written in your neural architecture. The resilience story is mapped in your synapses. Proof that hidden power of pain isn't mystical. It's measurable. There's a moment when you realize the shift is permanent. When you understand that you can never go back to who you were, even if you wanted to. That person died in the silence. That person was buried in the absence. What emerged from that grave is something else entirely. Something reborn from pain. Baptized in abandonment and crowned in the dark redemption story of self-resurrection. And the most dangerous thing about this new you, you're not angry anymore. You're not bitter. You're just done. Done explaining. Done begging. Done accepting crumbs. The monster they created isn't a villain. It's the version of you that finally learned that some doors need to stay closed. Some people need to stay in the past. And some transformations require burning the bridge you used to cross. The fire feels dangerous because it is. But it's the kind of danger that protects rather than destroys. The kind that says, never again. They saw your silence and called it surrender. They watched you withdraw and celebrated their victory. They mistook your absence for defeat, your quietness for weakness, your peace for powerlessness. How wrong they were. How catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. The monster was being built in that silence, and they were too blind to see the danger. You stopped fighting. Stopped arguing, stopped trying to make them understand, and they took that as confirmation that they won, that they broke you, that you finally accepted your place beneath them. They didn't realize that warriors don't stop fighting because they're defeated. They stop fighting because the opponent is no longer worth the energy, ignored and feared. But they only saw the first part. Every unreturned message was interpreted as pain. Every declined invitation as isolation, every boundary as bitterness. They created a narrative where you were the wounded one, limping away to lick your wounds in private. They told themselves you'd come crawling back when the loneliness got too heavy. They were writing a story where they remained the center of your universe. The dark transformation happening inside you never crossed their minds. Their arrogance was astounding. They genuinely believed that your world revolved around them, that your absence was temporary, that you were just going through a phase. They couldn't comprehend that you weren't circling back. You were moving forward, that you weren't hiding. You were building, that your silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. Pain breeds strength in the shadows where they can't see. You watched them from a distance, amused by their confidence. They were so certain of their importance in your life, so sure that you needed them more than they needed you, so convinced that time would bring you back, desperate and apologetic. They didn't know that every day of distance was another day of clarity, another day of growth, another day of reborn from pain becoming permanent reality. The psychology of underestimation is predictable. People project their own limitations onto others. If they couldn't survive without validation, they assumed you couldn't either. If they needed constant connection, they assumed your absence meant suffering. They measured your experience by their own shallow capacity for growth. And that miscalculation would cost them everything. Underestimated revenge is sweetest when they never see it coming. You let them believe what they wanted. Correcting their assumptions would require caring about their opinions, and that ship had sailed. Let them think you were broken while you were actually breaking free. Let them think you were weak while you were building inner monster strength they couldn't fathom. Their delusion was your advantage. Their blindness was your power. They started noticing something was off when you stopped being available. When their texts went unanswered not because you were crying over them, but because you genuinely forgot to check your phone. When invitations were declined, not out of spite, but out of having better things to do. The realization crept in slowly. You weren't suffering, you were thriving, and that terrified them. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. You went from poor thing to cold-hearted overnight. From needs support to thinks they're better than everyone in a heartbeat. Your growth became arrogance in their eyes because they needed you small to feel big. Your peace became a threat because it exposed their chaos. From failure to feared happens when they realize you don't need their approval to exist. The confusion in their faces was almost comical. How dare you be okay without them? How dare you smile without their permission? How dare you build a life where they're optional instead of essential? Your powerful comeback wasn't what they expected, because it didn't include them at all. You didn't come back to prove anything. You just moved on. And that was more devastating than any confrontation. They tried testing the waters. Casual messages, random likes on old posts, sudden interest in your life. But you saw through it with crystal clarity. They didn't miss you. They missed the version of you that made them feel important. They didn't want you back. They wanted their emotional supply back. The awakening the monster gave you vision they couldn't manipulate anymore. Some of them got angry. How dare you outgrow them? How dare you be happy without jumping through their hoops? The audacity of your peace became an insult to their ego. They needed you broken to validate their actions. Your healing made them the villain, and they hated you for that mirror. Dark motivation doesn't need their approval. That's what makes it dangerous. Others tried guilt, reminded you of good times that were actually just moments when you served their needs, accused you of changing, of being different, of losing yourself. They were right about one thing. You did change. You became someone whose suffering makes strong instead of someone whose suffering destroys. And that transformation was unforgivable in their eyes because it meant they lost control. The neuroscience of social hierarchy explains this perfectly. When someone they perceived as below them rises, it triggers threat responses in their brain. Your growth isn't just personal success. It's a challenge to their worldview. The resilience story you're living rewrites the script they had for you. And people hate when the supporting character becomes the hero of their own story. But here's the beautiful, brutal truth. Their confusion, their anger, their desperate attempts to pull you back. It's all irrelevant. They're screaming into the void of your absence, and you're not even listening anymore. You're too busy building the life they said you didn't deserve. Too busy becoming the monster they created, but can never control. Too busy proving that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's indifference. They confused your absence with weakness, and by the time they realized their mistake, you were already gone. And the hidden power of pain had transformed you into someone who would never, ever come back. In the darkness of your mind, something extraordinary is happening. While the world sees nothing, while they assume you're just getting over it, your brain is conducting a revolution. Every neural pathway that once led to them is being rerouted. Every emotional response that made you weak is being rewritten. This isn't healing. This is evolution. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself after trauma. But that clinical term doesn't capture the raw power of what's actually occurring. Your mind is becoming a laboratory where pain is the catalyst, where isolation is the incubator, and where the inner monster is being engineered with surgical precision. You're not just remembering what happened, you're dissecting it. Every conversation replays in your mind, but this time you see the manipulation. Every moment of care reveals itself as control. Every promise exposes itself as a lie. The fog of emotional attachment is lifting, and what remains is brutal, undeniable clarity. Pain breeds strength through this ruthless analysis. Memory reconsolidation is the technical term. Each time you recall a painful memory, your brain has the opportunity to rewrite it with new information. You're not changing what happened, you're changing what it means. That betrayal isn't proof you're unlovable, it's proof they were incapable of love. That rejection isn't your failure, it's their loss. The narrative is being rewritten in real time. The prefrontal cortex, your brain's executive center, is strengthening with each day of reflection. Decision-making pathways are forming that didn't exist before. The part of you that used to rationalize their behavior, that made excuses, that gave endless second chances, that neural network is being systematically dismantled. Dark transformation isn't just emotional, it's neurological. In this mental laboratory, you're conducting experiments on your own psyche. What happens if I don't respond? Freedom. What happens if I set a boundary? Peace. What happens if I choose myself? Power. Each experiment yields data, and the data is undeniable. You function better without them. The monster is being built on evidence, not emotion. Your amygdala, the fear center, is recalibrating. It used to fire in panic at the thought of losing them, of being alone, of not being chosen. Now, silence. The threat assessment has changed. They're no longer essential to your survival. In fact, they're the opposite. They were the threat. Suffering makes strong by teaching your nervous system what real danger looks like. You're learning to read people with terrifying accuracy. The manipulation tactics that once worked on you are now transparent. You see the love bombing before the devaluation. You recognize the guilt trips before they're fully formed. You spot the emotional blackmail in real time. This laboratory has given you a PhD in human behavior, earned through pain instead of papers. The hippocampus, responsible for memory processing, is working overtime, connecting dots you missed before. That comment that seemed innocent, gaslighting, that concern that felt caring, control, that jealousy that looked like love, possession. The awakening the monster happens when pattern recognition becomes flawless. You'll never be fooled the same way twice. This mental space is where reborn from pain becomes literal. Your brain is killing off the neurons that served your old self and growing new ones that serve who you're becoming. It's not metaphorical death and rebirth. It's actual cellular regeneration. The person they knew is dying at the molecular level, and something stronger is taking its place. You're also developing what psychologists call earned secure attachment. You're learning to be your own safe place, your own comfort, your own validation. The external approval you once craved is being replaced by internal stability. The power of the outcast is realizing you don't need to belong to anyone. You belong to yourself. In this darkness, you're mapping the architecture of manipulation so you'll recognize it forever. Every tactic they used is now cataloged in your mental database. Every weakness they exploited is now fortified. The laboratory is creating from failure to feared by ensuring the failure can never be repeated. You're building immunity to their poison, the most dangerous part of this process. You're getting good at it. Too good. The cold analysis that once felt foreign now feels natural. The emotional distance that once scared you now feels safe. The dark motivation that powers this transformation is becoming your default setting. And there's no going back from this level of awareness. Your mirror neurons, the ones responsible for empathy, are being selective now. You're not becoming heartless. You're becoming discerning. You save your empathy for those who've earned it, not those who demand it. The resilience story includes learning that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. This laboratory taught you that some people don't deserve access to your heart, and so the work continues in silence. While they think you're broken, you're being rebuilt. While they assume you're suffering, you're studying. While they move on with their shallow lives, you're developing hidden power of pain into tangible strength. The laboratory inside your mind is dark, yes, but it's producing something they never expected. Something they'll never understand until it's standing in front of them, unbreakable and unmoved. The monster they created in their absence, perfected in yours. There comes a moment when you stop apologizing for taking up space, when you stop shrinking to make others comfortable, when you stop editing your truth to fit their narrative. That moment is the birth of the monster they always feared you'd become. And the most terrifying part, you're not sorry about it. You used to say, "I'm sorry for things that weren't your fault. Sorry for having needs. Sorry for having feelings. Sorry for existing in a way that inconvenienced them." Every apology was a small death, a piece of yourself sacrificed at the altar of their comfort. Pain breeds strength when you finally realize those apologies were never owed. The first time you said no, Mar, without explanation, you felt the ground shift beneath you. No justification, no defense, no paragraph explaining why you can't meet their demands. Just no. And in that single syllable, you reclaimed power you didn't even know you'd lost. The dark transformation is complete when boundaries become reflexive, not rebellious. People who benefited from your weakness call this change, becoming cold. They say you've lost yourself, when really you've found yourself. They mistake your self-preservation for cruelty because they're so used to you being the sacrifice. The inner monster they see is just the part of you that refuses to bleed anymore, and they hate it. You stopped performing, stopped pretending to be smaller, quieter, less intense than you are. The version of you that dimmed its light to avoid outshining others. Dead, buried, never coming back. Now you walk into rooms and take up exactly the space you deserve, ignored and feared, and you prefer it that way. Better to be feared than forgotten. Your voice changed. There's no more uptalk, no more questioning inflection seeking approval. You speak in statements now, not suggestions. You make declarations, not requests. The change is subtle, but unmistakable. People lean in when you talk because they sense something dangerous lurking beneath the calm. Suffering makes strong in ways that change even how sound leaves your mouth. You're done explaining yourself. Done defending your choices to people who wouldn't understand even if you drew them a map. Your life is not a democracy where everyone gets a vote. It's a dictatorship, and you're the only one in power. The awakening. The monster means understanding that some people don't deserve access to your reasoning, your plans, or your heart. The guilt that used to follow every boundary. Gone. You used to feel bad about disappointing people, even when their expectations were unreasonable. Now you understand that their disappointment is not your responsibility. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Reborn from pain means rising with fireproof skin and refusing to be kindling ever again. You stopped caring about being liked. That desperate need for approval that once drove every decision, extinguished. You'd rather be respected, or better yet, left alone. The powerful comeback isn't about winning them back. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need their validation to know your worth. That's the ultimate freedom. There's a particular kind of power in not needing closure. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to see your side. You just move on. That absence of need is more powerful than any confrontation. From failure to fear, it happens when you become unreachable, not through anger, but through indifference. You learned to weaponize your absence. They thought losing access to you would hurt you more than it hurt them. Wrong. Your absence became the consequence they never saw coming. No drama, no fights, just the cold reality of a door that's closed and locked from your side. Underestimated revenge is simply becoming unavailable to people who took your availability for granted. The monster that's been born doesn't ask for permission or forgiveness. It doesn't explain. It doesn't apologize. It simply exists in its full, unedited truth. And if that makes people uncomfortable, good. Their comfort was always built on your discomfort anyway. This isn't cruelty, it's balance. This isn't meanness, it's self-respect, finally finding its voice. You notice how they scramble now, how they suddenly want to talk, to reconnect, to catch up. But you see it for what it is. Not genuine interest, but ego injury. They can't stand that you're thriving without them, that you're not begging them to come back, that you built a life where they're not even a footnote. Dark motivation fuels a life so good it makes them regret leaving. The most dangerous thing about this version of you, you're not pretending. This isn't an act to make them jealous or a phase you'll grow out of. This is permanent cellular level change. The resilient story isn't about bouncing back to who you were. It's about launching forward into who you were always meant to be. Someone who doesn't apologize for the hidden power of pain that transformed them. And so the monster walks through the world without apology. Not destroying, just existing on its own terms. Not attacking, just refusing to be attacked. Not seeking revenge, just living so well that your happiness becomes the reminder of what they lost. They created this. They forged this strength with their absence, and now they get to watch it from a distance they can never cross again. They notice something's different before they understand what. Your energy has changed. Your vibe has shifted. The desperation that once made you accessible, that made you safe to ignore, it's gone. And that absence creates a vacuum that pulls their attention in ways your presence never could. The monster announces itself not with roars, but with silence. The messages start coming. Casual at first. Hey, how have you been? As if they didn't ghost you for months. As if they didn't choose silence when you needed them most. As if they have any right to your time, your energy, your response. Pain breeds strength that includes the strength to leave texts unread without a shred of guilt. They're not reaching out because they miss you. They're reaching out because they miss the supply you provided, the validation, the attention, the emotional labor you freely gave while they gave nothing back. Now that supply has been cut off, and they're feeling the withdrawal, ignored and feared, but now they're the ones being ignored, and it's driving them insane. Some try the guilt approach. I thought we were friends. You've really changed. I don't even recognize you anymore. Good. You shouldn't. The person they're looking for is dead. Reborn from pain means the old, you stays buried. They don't get to summon the ghost of who you were just because they're finally feeling your absence. Others try manufactured emergencies, sudden crises that require your immediate attention, problems only you can solve, drama that demands your emotional investment. But you see through it now with X-ray vision. Every emergency is just bait. Every crisis is manipulation. The dark transformation gave you immunity to their tactics. You watch them cycle through the playbook. Love bombing when indifference doesn't work. Anger when love bombing fails. Bargaining when anger pushes you further away. It's almost predictable. Almost boring. You've studied this dance from the outside now, and you're no longer willing to be their partner. Suffering makes strong enough to be a spectator instead of a participant. The most telling part, they never actually apologize. They never acknowledge what they did. They never take responsibility for the wounds they inflicted. They just want access again, on their terms, when it's convenient for them. The inner monster knows that reconciliation without accountability is just another form of disrespect. You see the panic set in when they realize you're not coming back, not with anger, not with drama, not at all. The person who used to bend over backward for their attention now doesn't even acknowledge their existence. That reversal of power terrifies them. From failure to feared is a journey they forced you to take, and now they're facing the consequences. Some show up in person, coincidental, meetings that are anything but. They want to trigger the old patterns, the old responses, the old version of you that couldn't say no to their face. But you're different now. Your boundaries don't disappear in their presence. The awakening. The monster includes learning that proximity doesn't equal access. They try reminding you of good times. Nostalgia as a weapon. Remember when we... Yes, you remember. You remember the good times that made you stay through the bad. The breadcrumbs of kindness between the meals of cruelty. The powerful comeback includes refusing to let selective memory erase selective mistreatment. The gossip starts. You're bitter. You're holding grudges. You're not over it. Let them talk. Let them create whatever narrative helps them sleep at night. Your silence on the matter speaks louder than any defense ever could. Dark motivation doesn't need to explain itself to people who wouldn't understand anyway. A few try using mutual connections, flying monkeys to gather information, to guilt you, to relay their messages. But you're wise to that game now. You keep your life private, your plans vague, your transformation visible only to those who've earned the right to witness it. Underestimated revenge includes becoming a mystery they can no longer solve. The irony is beautiful. When you were present, available, giving, they treated you like an option. Now that you're absent, unreachable, unmoved, they treat you like a priority, but it's too late. The window closed, the door locked, the bridge burned. Resilience story sometimes means watching them finally want what they lost while feeling absolutely nothing about it. You realize this moment was inevitable. They were always going to notice your absence eventually. The difference is that you're no longer waiting for that moment. You're not holding your breath for recognition or vindication. Their awareness of what they lost doesn't change what you've gained. The hidden power of pain is that it teaches you to be whole without them. And so they reach out into the void of your absence, getting only silence in return. Not because you're punishing them, not because you're bitter, but because you've genuinely moved on to a life where they simply don't exist. The monster they created doesn't need their acknowledgement, their apology, or their presence. It just needs to keep walking forward, leaving them smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror until they disappear completely. That's when you know the transformation is complete. Here's the truth they don't want you to know. The real enemy was never out there. It wasn't the people who abandoned you, betrayed you, or broke you. The real enemy was always inside. The voice that told you it was your fault. The part of you that accepted mistreatment as normal. The inner monster you were running from was actually trying to save you. You spent years fighting the wrong battle. Fighting to be accepted by people who didn't deserve you. Fighting to prove your worth to those who couldn't recognize value. Fighting against the anger, the darkness, the shadow parts of yourself that were screaming warnings you refused to hear. Pain breeds strength when you finally stop fighting yourself and start listening. That voice inside that said, "This isn't right," wasn't paranoia. That gut feeling that screamed, "Leave," wasn't overreaction. That shadow self that wanted to burn it all down wasn't evil. It was your survival instinct trying to save you from your own people-pleasing tendencies. The dark transformation begins when you realize your darkness was trying to protect your light. Psychology calls it the shadow, the repository of everything you've repressed, every angry thought you swallowed, every boundary you didn't set, every time you chose their comfort over your safety. That shadow grew bigger, darker, more powerful with each betrayal you accepted. Not because you're weak, because you were strong enough to carry it without breaking. Until now. The breakthrough comes when you stop seeing your shadow as the enemy and start seeing it as the bodyguard you desperately needed. That monster everyone fears. It's the part of you that's done being hurt, done being used, done being the sacrifice in everyone else's story. Suffering makes strong when you integrate the lesson instead of rejecting the teacher. Neuroscience backs this up. The amygdala, your threat detection system, was firing warnings constantly. but you overrode it with your prefrontal cortex, rationalizing their behavior, making excuses, talking yourself out of your own intuition. You literally fought your own brain's protective mechanisms. The awakening the monster is actually awakening to what your body knew all along. Every time you felt that knot in your stomach around them, that was your nervous system saying danger. Every time you felt exhausted after giving them attention, that was your body saying this is draining you. Every time you cried alone, that was your soul saying this isn't love. You called it anxiety. It was actually clarity trying to break through the denial. The enemy wasn't your anger. It was your inability to express it appropriately. The enemy wasn't your darkness. It was your refusal to let it protect you. The enemy wasn't your boundaries. It was the guilt you felt for having them. Reborn from pain means being reborn with all parts of yourself integrated, not just the acceptable ones. You look back now and see how you abandoned yourself repeatedly, how you gaslit your own instincts, how you betrayed your own needs to maintain relationships that were killing you slowly. The resilience story isn't just about surviving them. It's about surviving your own self-sabotage. That's the harder truth to swallow. The real transformation happens when you forgive yourself, not for being weak, but for being human. For wanting to be loved so badly, you accepted substitutes. For being so afraid of loneliness, you chose toxic company. For ignoring your inner monster when it tried to warn you that you were in danger. That forgiveness is the key that unlocks everything. Integration is the goal, not elimination. You don't kill the monster. You make peace with it. You don't suppress the darkness. You learn to use it as discernment. You don't fight your shadow. You let it stand guard at the door of your heart, deciding who gets entry. From failure to feared is about becoming whole, not becoming hard. This is the darkest truth of all. You had to become your own villain before you could become your own hero. You had to betray yourself enough times to understand the value of self-loyalty. You had to ignore your intuition enough to learn to trust it absolutely. The hidden power of pain is that it forced you to confront the only person who could truly save you, yourself. The war inside is over when you realize there was never supposed to be a war. Your light and dark aren't enemies, they're partners. One shows you who to trust, the other shows you how to love. Together, they create something ignored and feared. A person who is both compassionate and impenetrable. Soft, but not weak. Kind, but not exploitable. Loving, but not naive. You stand now as a complete person, not the half version that only showed acceptable emotions, not the edited version that made others comfortable, but the full source unfiltered Eeyores integrated version that includes both the light they loved and the darkness they created. The monster and the human living in the same body, working together instead of against each other. That's the powerful comeback nobody saw coming, and the beautiful, brutal truth. The real enemy was never out there. It was the part of you that wouldn't let the monster protect you when you needed it most. Now that you've made peace with every part of yourself, now that the internal war is over, you're finally, terrifyingly, unstoppably free. The dark motivation that comes from this integration isn't about revenge. It's about never being at war with yourself again. And that peace, that's more dangerous than any monster ever could be. You walk differently now. There's a weight to your steps that wasn't there before. Not heaviness, authority. People move out of your way without knowing why. They sense something in you that can't be named but definitely can't be challenged. The monster they created doesn't announce itself. It just exists. And that existence alone changes the atmosphere. Your silence has become a weapon sharper than any words. You don't argue anymore. Don't defend. Don't explain. You just watch, observe, and decide who deserves your energy. That discernment terrifies people who are used to everyone being available, accessible, eager to engage. Ignored and feared becomes your permanent state, and you've never felt more powerful. The eyes are different. People notice that first. There's no more pleading in them. No more hope that someone will finally see your worth. Just cold, clear assessment. You look at people now the way a chess master looks at a board, calculating a strategic, always 3 moves ahead. Pain breeds strength that shows itself first in the gaze. You've stopped performing emotions for social acceptance. If you're not happy, you don't smile. If you're not interested, you don't pretend. The social lubricant of fake enthusiasm has dried up completely. You're present in your truth. And if that makes people uncomfortable, that's data. That's information about who can handle reality and who needs illusion. The dark transformation made you allergic to pretense. Your voice dropped an octave, not literally but energetically. There's a bass note of certainty underneath everything you say. No uptalk, no questioning inflection seeking approval. Just statements, declarations, truths delivered without apology. Suffering makes strong in ways that change even the frequency at which you vibrate. People who once talked over you now go quiet when you speak. Not because you demand attention, because you command it. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. You're no longer background noise. You're the soundtrack. And they know instinctively that interrupting you would be a mistake they'd regret. The awakening, the monster changed the social hierarchy without you saying a word about it. You move through spaces like you own them. Not arrogantly, just without apology, without making yourself smaller. Without that constant awareness of taking up too much room. You exist in full dimension now, and the world has to adjust to your presence instead of you adjusting to its comfort. Reborn from pain means being reborn without the habit of shrinking. The monster doesn't need validation, doesn't need approval, doesn't need anything from anyone. That independence is intoxicating and terrifying to witness. People are so used to everyone wanting something. Attention, approval, connection, reassurance. You want nothing, need nothing, require nothing. That self-sufficiency is the most threatening thing you could possibly embody. You've become comfortable in your solitude in a way that makes others deeply uncomfortable. You don't fill silence with nervous chatter. You let it sit. Let it breathe. Let it reveal who can handle depth and who needs constant distraction. The power of the outcast is realizing that being alone is better than being depleted by the wrong company. Your boundaries are now enforced with the casualness of someone closing a door. No drama, no explanation, just no, and the door closes. The conversation ends. The relationship terminates. You've made peace with being the villain in their story, if it means being the hero in yours. From failure to feared required learning that some people need to fear your absence to understand your value. They watch you build a life they're not part of. They see you thriving in spaces they can't access. They hear about your success through mutual connections, through social media, through the grapevine, and it kills them that you did it without them, that you're doing it without needing their approval or acknowledgement. Underestimated revenge is succeeding so loudly they can't help but hear it. The most dangerous thing about this version of you, you're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're not performing strength. You're not faking confidence. This is just who you are now. Fundamentally, permanently, irreversibly. The resilience story wrote itself into your DNA. This isn't an act you'll drop. This is the new baseline. You walk alone, but never lonely. You stand apart, but never isolated. You exist in your truth. And the right people are drawn to it while the wrong people are repelled by it. That natural selection process happens automatically now. The hidden power of pain is that it made you magnetic to quality and repulsive to toxicity without you trying. People whisper when you leave rooms, not gossip. Wonder, well, what happened to them? They're so different now. I can't quite put my finger on it. They sense the dark motivation radiating from you like heat from a furnace. They know something fundamental shifted. They just don't know that what shifted was your willingness to ever be small again. And so the monster walks through the world that created it, neither destroying nor apologizing, just existing, just being, just living in the fullness of integrated power. The absence that built this creation was the forge. The pain was the hammer. The solitude was the cooling chamber. And what emerged? Something ignored and feared in equal measure. A person who learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so undeniably, unapologetically powerful that your mere existence is a reminder of what they lost when they chose to walk away. That's the powerful comeback nobody saw coming. The one where you don't come back at all. You just keep walking forward and they never stop regretting that they're not walking beside you.